First, we will preview the major points of this presentation. There is a problem that needs to be addressed. Northern Utah is on the verge of an electric power crisis. There are several possible solutions to this problem. One that is perhaps the simplest plan results in 83 miles of transmission lines but cannot be implemented due to bottleneck corridors in and out of the Salt Lake Valley. Rocky Mountain Power's current plan results in 141 miles of transmission line and one huge substation. The first phase of that plan proposes to install 96 of 141 miles of line and will deliver 700 megawatts of power to the Salt Lake Valley. This project needs to be evaluated with a long-term perspective. Using appropriate criteria, we can come up with a better plan that is 17 miles shorter, less expensive, and more efficient to operate. Rocky Mountain Power has an obligation to serve the public and mitigate its impacts. We will show how the better plan incorporates a North Tooele Valley substation that meets this obligation with better efficiency and benefits all of northern Utah. The better plan can be implemented in phases. The first phase results in 16 fewer miles of transmission line and 100 more megawatts for the Salt Lake Valley than the current plan. It also allows for debottlenecking the Lake Point corridor. 5 major substations and several smaller substations serve the Salt Lake Valley. A ring of 345 kilovolt lines transmits electric power between them. Several 345 kilovolt transmission lines approaching from the north and from the south energize this ring. 2 138 kilovolt transmission lines draw power from the ring in Salt Lake Valley to provide service to Tooele County. Each has a capacity to draw 200 megawatts for a total of 400 megawatts from the Salt Lake Valley. There is a looming problem with the electric supply in northern Utah. According to the Governor's Office of Economic Development, in the next 20 years, the Wasatch Front population will double, and the Tooele Valley's population will triple. And both valleys have already consumed their available transmission capacity. Rocky Mountain Power predicts brownouts in the Salt Lake Valley by 2013. The Tooele Valley is already experiencing power-limited economic growth and frequent prolonged outages. New transmission lines and substations are needed for the Wasatch Front and all of northern Utah. The simplest plan to solve the problem is to bring power straight up from Mona through the Cedar Valley with a 500 kilovolt transmission line, and to add a 345 kilovolt line out to Tooele Valley and a substation. This makes a total of 83 miles of transmission line. However, this plan has a couple of problems. First of all, the Cedar Valley is already full of less efficient 345 kilovolt lines, and Rocky Mountain Power feels it does not have the corridor available for a 500 kilovolt line. Secondly, the narrow space between the Great Salt Lake and the Oquirrh Mountains near Lake Point is also bottlenecked with less efficient 138 kilovolt lines. In fact, corridors on the north, south, and west of the Salt Lake Valley are all bottlenecks plugged with relatively inefficient and low voltage transmission lines. Rocky Mountain Power has prepared a plan that addresses at least some of this problem and is in the process of completing an environmental impact statement. They propose to bring a 500 kilovolt transmission line from Mona through Rush Valley to the southwest corner of the Tooele Valley, and then branch into 2 345 kilovolt lines that run around 3 sides of Tooele Valley, and then over and around the Oquirrh Mountains into Salt Lake Valley. It has been called the Mona to Oquirrh Power Line, but it's also a Mona to Terminal Power Line. This results in one very large substation and 141 miles of transmission line. Rocky Mountain Power intends to implement this plan in phases. The first phase will bring power up from the south and install the southern branch to the Oquirrh substation. This branch takes a controversial route along Tooele City's east foothills, and install the substation and terminal branch later, probably in about 3 years. The first phase will be 96 of the 141 miles of transmission line in the plan. The first phase will deliver 700 megawatts of power to the Salt Lake Valley. Tooele Valley's 400 megawatt load will still be drawn from the Salt Lake Valley. Now let's talk about the criteria to evaluate the current plan and perhaps improve on it. One thing we know is that transmission lines have a long life, typically 50 years or more. The corridor established by these lines will likely exist for well over 100 years as the transmission lines are rebuilt and roads and other utilities co-locate on the same path. Hence, we should evaluate the project with a very long-term perspective. We know a few things will happen in the next 100 years relative to these transmission lines. We know that Salt Lake and Tooele Valleys will continue to grow in population and industry. We know that the terminal branch will be needed in about 3 years. We can also confidently predict that an additional 500 kilovolt line will be needed to serve Salt Lake Valley within about 20 years. If Salt Lake needs one now, it will certainly need another one after the population doubles. even sooner as northern Utah becomes dependent on the power supplied by the 500 kilovolt line from Mona. Reliability concerns will certainly call for an alternate 500 kilovolt source. It is logical and easiest to connect to sources approaching from the west and northwest along the west side of the Great Salt Lake. We also know that once established, the substation will attract many more transmission and distribution lines in the future. We also know that shorter transmission lines are preferable. They are less expensive to build and maintain. They also operate more efficiently. We know that higher voltages are ultimately less expensive to install. A 500 kilovolt line costs about 50% more to install than a 345 kilovolt line but delivers 100% more power. We know that higher voltages are more efficient to operate. The higher the voltage, the exponentially lower the line loss. And when it comes to justification, the only redeeming value to a transmission line is the power it delivers. Transmission lines pose risks and do not improve safety. They negatively impact the environment. They diminish property values. They are noisy, ugly, and an eyesore. They're expensive by many measures. The only thing they are good for is delivery of power. These evaluation criteria are tools that we can now use to improve the current plan and build a better plan.